The cold CEO ignored everyone at the charity gala, then walked straight to me. Hello everyone and welcome back. Before we dive into today's unforgettable story, I'd love to ask for one small favor. If you enjoy emotional romances, unexpected twists, and heartwarming journeys, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. It only takes a moment, it's completely free, and your support helps us continue creating stories that bring laughter, tears, and hope to audiences around the world. We truly appreciate every single one of you. And now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Tell us your city or your country in the comments below so everyone in our community can see how far these stories travel. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let's return to our main character. Some people walk into a room chasing attention. The rare ones change a life by deciding where to stop. I had no business standing beneath crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire apartment building. Every polished marble floor reflected people who looked as though they had stepped straight out of luxury magazines, dressed in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, smiling for cameras with the effortless confidence that came from belonging. I did not belong. My name is Miles Bennett, and on weekdays I taught art to children at a small community center on the south side of Chicago. On weekends, I volunteered anywhere that needed an extra pair of hands. That was how I ended up working at the Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala, wearing a borrowed black suit that fit just well enough to avoid embarrassment, and a volunteer badge clipped inside my jacket pocket where I hoped no one would notice it. My job was simple. Smile. Guide guests toward the silent auction. Refill the display brochures. Stay out of the way. That last instruction turned out to be harder than expected. The ballroom buzzed with conversations about investments, international expansion, and vacation homes somewhere I had only seen on postcards. I nodded politely whenever someone looked in my direction, pretending I understood. Discussions about private equity and luxury yachts while secretly wondering whether the kids in my Saturday art class had remembered to water the sunflowers we planted behind the building. My world felt very far away from this one. Still, I couldn't deny the event itself was beautiful. Every centerpiece had been designed by local florists. Paintings created by young artists lined one wall, waiting to be auctioned for scholarships. Watching guests stop to admire those colorful canvases made me smile because somewhere out there, a child was about to discover that someone believed in their talent. That alone made the evening worth volunteering for. Then the room changed. It wasn't loud. No music stopped. No announcer raised a microphone. Yet conversations softened almost instantly, like a breeze passing across the surface of a lake. Heads turned toward the grand entrance. Adrian Whitmore had arrived. Even I knew his name. Every business magazine called him the coldest CEO in America. Reporters described him as brilliant, disciplined, and nearly impossible to read. He rarely smiled in public, never attended celebrity parties unless charity was involved, and somehow managed to donate millions every year without turning generosity into a publicity campaign. People respected him. Many feared him. Everyone watched him. Standing nearly 6'4", dressed in a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, Adrian entered the ballroom with calm, measured confidence. Executives immediately stepped forward. Board members straightened their jackets. A television host rehearsed her introduction under her breath. It looked as though half the room had been waiting for this exact moment. Adrian acknowledged none of them. His expression never changed. He continued walking with quiet purpose, passing one influential guest after another without slowing down. Curious whispers spread across the ballroom. I followed everyone's gaze for only a second before looking back down at the stack of auction catalogs in my hands. I reminded myself that men like Adrian Whitmore existed in newspapers, not in my life. My attention drifted for just one careless moment. Someone brushed past my shoulder. The catalogs slipped from my hands. At the same instant, a champagne flute tipped sideways, sending sparkling liquid across the front of my jacket. My heart nearly stopped. Wonderful, Miles, I thought. 30 seconds before the most important donor's speech, and you've managed to wear the refreshments. I crouched quickly, trying to gather the scattered papers before anyone noticed. But the ballroom had gone strangely quiet. A pair of polished black dress shoes stopped directly in front of me. I looked up slowly, expecting to see another volunteer or perhaps a server asking if I needed help. But instead I found myself staring into a pair of calm gray eyes that seemed completely unaffected by the whispers filling the ballroom. Adrian Whitmore stood in front of me with the same composed expression he had worn when he entered, as though the entire room had disappeared and only this awkward little disaster existed. Before I could say a word, he bent down without hesitation, picked up the nearest auction catalog, and stacked it neatly with the others. For a second my brain simply stopped working. Billionaires were not supposed to kneel on polished marble floors collecting papers for clumsy volunteers. "Thank you," I managed to mumble, my face burning with embarrassment as I accepted the stack from him. He glanced at the champagne stain spreading across my jacket and quietly reached into his pocket. Without any dramatic flourish, he offered me a folded white handkerchief. "It should come out if you blot it before it dries," he said in a steady voice. I blinked. That was it. No criticism. No impaciencia. Just practical advice delivered with surprising kindness. "I cannot let you ruin a perfectly good handkerchief," I replied, instinctively trying to hand it back. A faint corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close enough to soften the sharp lines of his face. "Keep it," he answered. "You need it more than I do." The silence around us suddenly felt much louder than any conversation had moments earlier. Camera shutters began clicking from somewhere across the ballroom. I turned my head and immediately regretted it. Every person within sight seemed to be staring directly at us. A television reporter whispered excitedly to her cameraman. Guests who had spent the last 10 minutes trying to catch Adrian's attention now looked completely bewildered. I wanted nothing more than to disappear behind the nearest floral arrangement. Instead, Adrian calmly extended one hand toward me. "Walk with me." I stared at his hand for half a heartbeat. "I think you have the wrong person," I whispered. "I am just volunteering tonight." "I know exactly who you are," he replied. Those words landed with far more weight than they should have. I accepted his hand only because refusing in front of hundreds of people somehow felt even more awkward. He helped me to my feet with an easy, respectful gesture, then began walking toward the center of the ballroom. I stayed beside him, convinced someone would stop us at any second and explain that an unfortunate mistake had been made. No one did. Instead, conversations erupted all around us in hushed voices. "Who is he?" someone asked. "Is that his partner?" Another guest whispered. "I have never seen Adrian Whitmore bring anyone to an event," someone else murmured. Each sentence made my heartbeat climb higher. We reached the grand staircase overlooking the auction displays, and Adrian finally slowed his pace. Without looking directly at me, he spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "Do not worry about what they are thinking." I swallowed hard. "They are definitely thinking something." This time I caught it. The smallest hint of amusement flickered across his face before disappearing again. "Yes," he admitted. "That is exactly what I was hoping for." I turned toward him in complete confusion. "I am sorry." "Hoping for what?" He looked across the ballroom as another wave of camera flashes lit the room, then calmly answered. "For everyone to stop paying attention to the story they expected tonight and start paying attention to a different one." For a long moment I simply stared at Adrian, convinced I had misunderstood him. "A different story?" I repeated quietly. He nodded once, his attention still drifting across the ballroom where reporters had already begun comparing photographs on their cameras. "People came here expecting another headline about business rivalries," he said. "Instead, they are asking questions that have nothing to do with my competitors." I frowned. "I do not understand why that matters." Adrian finally turned toward me, and for the first time I noticed something unusual beneath his calm expression. He did not look nervous. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from missing a night's sleep, but the kind that settled into someone after carrying responsibility for far too many years. "Because for the last 6 months," he said, "someone has been trying very hard to convince the public that everything I do is calculated for personal gain. Every donation, every scholarship, every hospital project. According to them, kindness is simply another marketing strategy. I folded my arms, still holding his white handkerchief. And you think standing next to a complete stranger changes that? Not just any stranger. His answer came immediately. Someone who had absolutely no reason to expect me to walk across that room. I let out a small laugh despite myself. That part is definitely true. A hint of warmth returned to his eyes. Authenticity cannot be rehearsed, Mr. Bennett. Hearing my name caught me off guard again. You know who I am? I made sure I did before I walked over. My confusion only deepened. Adrian gestured toward one of the paintings hanging along the charity exhibit. It was a bright landscape filled with oversized sunflowers beneath a summer sky. That painting was created by one of your students. I looked at the canvas in surprise. Emma painted that. She also wrote a letter thanking the Whitmore Foundation for funding your after-school program last year. My mouth opened slightly. You actually read those letters? Every one of them. There was no pride in his voice, only simple honesty. He continued. Emma said that before joining your class she believed drawing was something only talented people were allowed to do. You taught her that art belongs to anyone willing to pick up a pencil. For a moment I forgot where we were. The cameras, the expensive suits, the elegant ballroom all faded into the background. She is an incredible kid, I said softly. She only needed someone to believe in her. Adrian gave a slow nod. Exactly. He paused before speaking again. That is why I would like to ask something unusual of you. I felt my heartbeat quicken once more. I cannot promise anything until I know what it is. Fair enough. He folded his hands calmly in front of him. Over the next several weeks, I will be attending a number of public events connected to our education initiative. I would like you to accompany me. I almost laughed because the request sounded so impossible. There has to be someone more qualified. There are thousands. Then why me? Adrian answered without hesitation. Because everyone around me already knows how to impress important people. Very few remember how to inspire ordinary ones. His words settled somewhere deeper than I expected. Before I could respond, he added one final sentence. In return, the Whitmore Foundation will fully fund the new art center you have been trying to build on the south side. The room suddenly felt very still. My dream, the one I had quietly chased for 5 years through bake sales, donated paint supplies, and endless grant applications, was standing only a few feet away wearing a midnight blue tuxedo and speaking as though it were the simplest proposal in the world. I searched Adrian's face for any sign that this was a joke or some elaborate misunderstanding. I found neither. All I saw was a man waiting patiently for an answer that might change both of our lives. I should have said no. Every practical thought in my head insisted that accepting Adrian's offer would pull me into a world where I did not belong. Yet every time I imagined the empty warehouse that our community center hoped to transform into an art studio, I saw shelves filled with fresh paint, children laughing around easels, and parents no longer apologizing because they could not afford supplies. That dream had survived years of disappointment. If standing beside one mysterious chief executive for a few weeks could finally make it real, how could I walk away? I took a slow breath. If I agree, I said carefully, I am not pretending to be someone I am not. Adrian nodded immediately. I would not ask you to, and I will not lie if someone asks about us. Neither will I. His answer surprised me enough that I looked at him twice. Then what exactly are we doing? He glanced toward the ballroom where guests continued watching us from a respectful distance. We are allowing people to reach their own conclusions while we focus on the work that actually matters. It was an answer that somehow avoided being dishonest while revealing almost nothing. Before I could decide whether that made him brilliant or impossible to understand, the master of ceremonies announced that dinner would begin in 5 minutes. Adrian looked toward the stage, then back at me. Will you join me? I hesitated only a second before nodding. The walk across the ballroom felt much longer than it really was. Every table we passed seemed to grow quieter. I caught curious smiles, raised eyebrows, and more than a few puzzled expressions. Some guests looked amused. Others looked genuinely shocked. I kept reminding myself to breathe normally. Adrian, on the other hand, walked with the same steady pace as though none of the attention existed. When we reached the reserved table near the front, a woman wearing an elegant emerald dress stood to greet us. She appeared to be in her early 60s, with silver hair neatly styled and warm blue eyes that immediately softened when they met mine. "You must be Miles," she said before I had the chance to introduce myself. "I am Eleanor Hayes, director of the Whitmore Foundation." She extended her hand with genuine kindness. "It is lovely to finally meet the teacher everyone keeps writing to us about." I blinked again. Apparently more people knew my name than I realized. "It is nice to meet you too," I replied. Eleanor smiled. "Emma's letter was only one of many. We receive dozens from students every year, and your name appears quite often." I looked down for a moment, feeling unexpectedly embarrassed. "They are wonderful kids. They deserve the credit." "Good teachers always say that," she replied with a gentle laugh. As dinner was served, the conversation drifted away from business and toward education, neighborhood libraries, and the importance of creative spaces for children. I noticed Adrian spoke very little unless someone asked him a direct question. Instead, he listened carefully, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that encouraged others to share their experiences. The cold, distant executive described by every magazine suddenly seemed far more complicated than the headlines suggested. Near the end of the meal, Eleanor leaned toward me with a quiet smile. "Do not believe everything you read about Adrian." I glanced across the table where he was patiently listening to a young scholarship recipient describe her plans to study architecture. His expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable pride in his eyes as she spoke. Eleanor followed my gaze. "People often mistake silence for a lack of compassion," she said softly. "Sometimes silence simply means someone prefers helping others instead of talking about it." I looked at Adrian again, and for the first time that evening, I wondered whether the man the world thought it knew had been hiding in plain sight all along. The gala ended later than I expected, but the evening refused to leave my thoughts. Long after I returned to my apartment, Adrian's handkerchief still rested neatly on my kitchen table beside a chipped ceramic mug filled with paintbrushes. It looked strangely out of place among grocery receipts, unfinished lesson plans, and children's sketches waiting for me to grade the next morning. I must have looked at it a dozen times before finally falling asleep. By 8 o'clock the next morning, my phone would not stop buzzing. Friends from the community center had already seen photographs online. One headline asked who the mysterious man beside Adrian Whitmore was. Another article claimed the famous chief executive had quietly introduced someone special to Chicago's philanthropic community. I almost dropped my coffee when I read that one. I called my closest coworker, Sarah, hoping someone else would find the situation as ridiculous as I did. Instead, she answered the phone laughing. "Miles, you became the internet's favorite mystery overnight. Please tell me nobody actually believes those stories." "Honestly," she replied, "people believe whatever fits the picture they already have." I sighed. Nothing happened. He handed me a handkerchief. Apparently, he also ignored every important person in the ballroom to do it. I could not argue with that because it was exactly what everyone had witnessed. Before I could continue the conversation, another call appeared on my screen. The caller identification simply read Whitmore Foundation. My heart skipped a beat. I excused myself from Sarah and answered. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," Eleanor Hayes said warmly. "I hope we are not interrupting your class schedule." "Not at all," I replied. "I was just getting ready to leave." "Wonderful. Adrian would like to visit your community center this afternoon, if that is convenient." I nearly asked her to repeat herself. "He wants to come there?" "Yes. He prefers seeing projects firsthand before making long-term commitments." "Does anyone know he is coming?" Eleanor chuckled softly. "Only you and now me." The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I tried teaching perspective drawing, but my students quickly noticed I was distracted. Emma raised her hand halfway through class with an innocent smile. "Mr. Bennett, are you famous now?" The entire room burst into laughter. I covered my face for a second before laughing with them. Absolutely not. Another student pointed toward my phone. My dad said he saw you on television. Your dad needs a better hobby, I answered, earning another round of giggles. By early afternoon, I had almost convinced myself Adrian might cancel. Men who managed international companies surely had more important things to do than visit an old brick building with leaky windows and mismatched chairs. At exactly 2 o'clock, a simple black sedan pulled into the parking lot. No long motorcade. No flashing lights. No photographers. Adrian stepped out wearing dark jeans, brown boots, and a navy sweater instead of an expensive suit. If I had passed him on a neighborhood sidewalk, I might not have recognized him. He looked around quietly, taking in the faded mural on the side of the building, the cracked basketball court next door, and the handmade welcome sign one of the children had painted last spring. When he reached the front entrance, he smiled politely. "Thank you for inviting me." I stared for a moment before remembering to answer. "Thank you for actually coming." His eyes drifted toward the sound of children laughing inside the art room. The corners of his mouth softened almost imperceptibly. "I have attended board meetings all week," he said. "I believe this is exactly where I needed to be today." At that moment, I had the unmistakable feeling that the real Adrian Whitmore was finally about to step out from behind the carefully controlled public image the world thought it understood. The moment Adrian stepped into the art room, every carefully rehearsed introduction I had planned disappeared. The children noticed him before I could say a word. They did not recognize one of the most successful chief executives in America. They simply noticed someone new. Emma was the first to wave. "Hi," she called cheerfully, holding up a paintbrush covered in bright yellow acrylic. "Do you want to paint with us?" I almost apologized for the question, but Adrian surprised me again. He smiled gently and answered, "I would be honored." Within seconds, he found himself sitting on a small wooden chair designed for elementary school students, looking slightly out of place with his long legs tucked beneath the tiny table. The children did not care. They immediately surrounded him with paper, brushes, and enough enthusiastic advice to overwhelm anyone. "You need more blue. Do not forget the clouds. Trees are easier if you start with the trunk." I leaned against the doorway, quietly watching the scene unfold. The reserved businessman who rarely spoke during public interviews listened to every suggestion with complete attention. He asked each child for their name before speaking to them, and somehow remembered every single one only minutes later. "Liam likes dinosaurs," he said while passing a green marker across the table. "Sophia is making a lighthouse. Emma wants brighter sunflowers. Jacob thinks every picture should have a dog." The children laughed because he was exactly right. "How do you remember all of that?" I asked after class ended. Adrian carefully rinsed his paintbrush in a plastic cup before answering. "When people know they are being remembered, they also know they matter." His words lingered in my mind long after the children rushed outside for recess. We spent the afternoon walking through the aging building together. I showed him the leaking roof over the storage room, the cramped classroom where 2 programs shared the same space, and the empty warehouse next door that I had dreamed of turning into a proper art studio. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight pouring between cracked windows. "This could become something incredible," I said quietly. "A gallery, classrooms, music lessons, sculpture workshops. We have the volunteers. We just never have enough funding." Adrian remained silent for several moments, studying the empty space with thoughtful eyes. Finally he asked, "What would be the first thing you buy if money were no longer the problem?" I smiled without needing to think. "Better lighting." He looked surprised. "Not computers?" I shook my head. Children create differently when they can actually see colors the way they were meant to look. Everything starts with light. Adrian nodded slowly, as though filing that answer away somewhere important. Before leaving, he asked if we could stop by the old supply closet one last time. Inside stood shelves filled with donated paint, worn sketchbooks, and jars of mismatched brushes collected over years of community drives. He picked up one of the oldest paintbrushes, its wooden handle smooth from countless small hands. "How old is this?" he asked. I laughed. "Honestly, probably older than some of the volunteers. He ran his thumb lightly across the handle before placing it back exactly where he had found it. "My favorite teacher owned brushes that looked just like these," he said almost absent-mindedly. I turned toward him. It was the first time he had ever mentioned a teacher. He seemed to realize what he had revealed and fell quiet. After a brief pause, he looked toward the window overlooking the playground where the children were laughing together beneath the afternoon sun. "There was someone," he said softly, "who believed I could become more than the circumstances I was born into." His voice carried no self-pity, only gratitude. I did not interrupt. Some stories deserved patience. Adrian took one slow breath before continuing. "One person changed the direction of my entire life. I have been trying to repay that kindness ever since, even though I know I never truly can." At that moment I understood that the foundation, the scholarships, the donations, and every quiet act of generosity had never been about building a public image. They had all begun with a child who was once given hope by a teacher who simply chose to believe in him. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm neither of us could have predicted. Adrian kept every promise he had made. He visited the community center whenever his schedule allowed, attended education meetings with me instead of sending assistants, and quietly asked thoughtful questions that always focused on the children rather than the headlines. Somewhere along the way, the cameras found us again. Every public appearance produced another round of photographs and another wave of speculation. At first, I ignored the gossip. Then one Monday morning, everything changed. Sarah walked into my classroom carrying her phone with a worried expression. "You need to see this," she said softly. An article filled the screen. The headline claimed I had manipulated my way into Adrian Whitmore's life to gain access to the Whitmore Foundation. Another story insisted our community center had become nothing more than a publicity project. Anonymous sources claimed I had carefully planned the encounter at the Gala months in advance. I felt my stomach tighten as I scrolled through hundreds of comments from strangers who knew absolutely nothing about my life yet spoke, as though they had watched every decision I had ever made. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said. "Anyone who knows you would never believe it." I wanted to agree, but doubt has a quiet way of finding even confident people. By lunchtime, several parents had gently asked whether the stories were true. They were respectful, but I could hear uncertainty behind their questions. That evening, I received a message from Adrian asking if we could meet. We sat on a bench overlooking Lake Michigan just as the sun began disappearing behind the skyline. The cool breeze carried the sound of waves against the rocks while runners passed by without recognizing either of us. I handed him my phone without saying a word. He read several headlines before locking the screen and placing it beside him. "I expected this," he admitted calmly. "You expected people to accuse me of using you?" I asked. "No. I expected people to accuse you of using me." His honesty caught me off guard. "Why would you let me walk into this?" He remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Because I believed the good we could accomplish together would outweigh the noise." I looked across the water, struggling to sort through my emotions. The children are reading these stories now. That sentence seemed to affect him more than anything else. He lowered his head briefly before looking back at me. "I am sorry." It was not the polished apology of a public figure. It was simple, sincere, and completely unguarded. "If you choose to step away from this, I will understand." I searched his face for frustration, disappointment, or even an attempt to persuade me to stay. There was none. Only respect for whatever decision I made. "You are not going to defend yourself?" I asked quietly. Adrian smiled faintly. "Truth has a longer life than rumors. I have learned not to chase every false story." I thought about the children painting bright skies in our classroom, about Emma proudly hanging her sunflower landscape on the wall, and about the empty warehouse waiting to become something better. None of those dreams deserved to disappear because strangers preferred dramatic headlines over ordinary kindness. Even so, I also understood that remaining beside Adrian would invite more attention than I had ever wanted. As the evening light faded across the lake, I realized I had reached the point where every path carried a cost, and for the first time since the gala, I had no idea which choice would protect the people I cared about the most. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Adrian's quiet apology and saw the disappointment on the faces of the children if our plans were abandoned. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not let strangers who had never stepped inside our community center decide its future. When I arrived for class, Emma was already waiting by the door with a sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Mr. Bennett," she asked, "is Mr. Adrian coming back?" There was no curiosity about newspaper stories or internet rumors. She only wanted to know whether her new friend would keep helping the class paint. Before I could answer, Jacob looked up from his drawing and added, "He promised to show me how to make trees look more real." I smiled despite everything that had happened. I think he would like that very much. Their simple faith reminded me how different the world looked through the eyes of a child. They measured people by whether they listened, encouraged, and kept their promises, not by headlines or gossip. That afternoon I called Adrian and asked if he could meet me at the warehouse next to the community center. He arrived wearing the same relaxed clothes he had worn during his first visit, carrying a folder instead of a briefcase. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows as we stood in the middle of the empty space that had become so important to both of us. "I have made my decision," I said before he could speak. He waited quietly. "I am not walking away." A flicker of relief crossed his face, but he remained silent, allowing me to finish. "Not because I enjoy public attention. I actually dislike it. I am staying because those children deserve this place, and because I finally understand that you have never been doing this for recognition." Adrian looked around the vacant building before answering. "Thank you." I shook my head. "I have one condition." His expression grew curious. "Tell me." "No more letting other people write the story for us. We are not going to argue with rumors, but we are going to show people the truth through our actions." For the first time since I had met him, Adrian smiled without holding anything back. It was not a dramatic moment, only a genuine expression of hope, and somehow it transformed his entire face. "I believe that is the best strategy anyone has suggested to me in years," he said. Over the following months, construction began on the new art center. Instead of holding elaborate press conferences, the Whitmore Foundation invited local families, teachers, and volunteers to help paint walls, assemble bookshelves, and plant flowers outside the entrance. Adrian worked alongside everyone else, carrying boxes, arranging tables, and laughing quietly whenever the children insisted he needed more practice with a paint roller. Reporters still appeared from time to time, but the focus gradually shifted. Their cameras captured volunteers working together, students displaying their artwork, and neighbors celebrating a project that belonged to the entire community. The rumors slowly lost their power because they no longer matched what people could see with their own eyes. Nearly a year after the night that had unexpectedly connected our lives, the annual charity gala returned. Once again, the ballroom filled with elegant guests, bright lights, and quiet anticipation. Yet this time the atmosphere felt different. The foundation's newest achievement, the completed community art center, had become the evening's proudest accomplishment, and as Adrian stepped away from the stage after announcing another major education initiative, he ignored the crowd waiting to congratulate him. Instead, he walked through the ballroom with calm confidence until he stopped directly in front of me, smiling with the same quiet certainty that had changed everything the first time our paths crossed. Adrian stopped in front of me while the applause from the audience slowly faded into the background. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. We simply looked at one another, both remembering how differently this same ballroom had felt 1 year earlier. Then he smiled and held out a familiar white handkerchief. "I believe this belongs to you now," he said. I laughed, recognizing the same neatly folded handkerchief he had offered me on the night we first met. "I think you gave this to me a long time ago." He nodded. "You kept it." "I kept it because it reminded me that one unexpected act of kindness can change an entire life." His smile grew a little wider. Mine changed too. Around us, guests continued talking about the foundation's newest education projects, but for the first time no one seemed interested in inventing stories about us. They had watched the community art center open its doors. They had seen hundreds of children fill classrooms with paintings, music, and laughter. They had volunteered beside us, donated supplies, and witnessed something far more meaningful than any rumor. Truth had quietly replaced speculation. Eleanor soon joined us with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "I thought the 2 of you might want a moment before everyone asks for photographs," she said with a knowing smile. "Congratulations to both of you. Tonight is not about a building. It is about what happens inside it." She was right. The Art Center had already welcomed hundreds of students during its first year. Several graduates had earned scholarships. Local artists had begun mentoring young creators every weekend. Parents who once worried about paying for art supplies now watched their children discover confidence they never knew they possessed. Before leaving the gala, Adrian asked if I would take one short drive with him. We returned to the community center, where the new building stood glowing beneath soft evening lights. Through the front windows we could see colorful murals, rows of easels, shelves filled with books, and dozens of paintings created by children who finally had a place to dream without limits. We unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of fresh paint and clean wood filled the quiet hallway. Adrian looked around without saying anything for several moments. Finally he spoke. "When I was a boy, one teacher believed my future could be bigger than my circumstances. I spent years trying to repay that gift. I finally understand something now." I looked toward him. "What is that?" He glanced at the artwork covering the walls before answering. "Kindness is not something we repay. It is something we pass forward." I felt those words settle deeply in my heart because they perfectly described everything this journey had become. Neither of us had changed who we were. Adrian remained a thoughtful leader who believed success carried responsibility. I remained a teacher who believed every child deserved encouragement and opportunity. We had simply discovered that our different worlds were never meant to stay separate. Together they could create something neither of us could have built alone. As we prepared to lock the building for the night, Emma's sunflower painting caught my eye, hanging proudly near the entrance where every visitor would see it first. I smiled because it reminded me that hope often begins with something very small. A conversation, a simple choice, a helping hand, or a person willing to stop walking long enough to notice someone everyone else overlooked. Looking back, I realized the greatest gift I received was never the funding, the recognition, or the beautiful new building. It was learning that genuine character is revealed not by wealth, power, or reputation, but by the quiet decisions we make when nobody expects us to care. And if there is one lesson I hope every person carries from this story, it is this. The richest life is not measured by what we keep for ourselves, but by how many lives become brighter because we chose to share our compassion, our time, and our belief in one another.